Hello, my name is Kevin Mounts,
My name is Skyler Lewis.
and we are doing our Who Killed Benazir Bhutto assignment for case study number 4 in Professor Amy Ruba's ISIN 301 class. So the title for this case study is called Who Killed Benazir Bhutto, and we were supposed to come together with our separate ideas and our similar thoughts and come up with the hypotheses on who actually ordered the assassination or who actually did the assassination. So looking at our separate ideas, we did categorize it over here with separate thoughts. Some of the ones that were that came about, the first ones were family relations, like relatives or direct family members. Fatima, there's a couple of things with the husband denying the autopsy, which is a little suspicious because if I lost a loved one, I want an autopsy done, no matter if it was rigged or not, to have some kind of closure. And other unknown family. So looking at a political association, there were political rivals. This whole thing was about a political case in general. So there was Pervez Musharraf and her longtime rival Nawaz Sharif, which were some of the things that they just never agreed on. They were longtime political rivals. And then third, we kind of came together at the end because I didn't even think about it, but Skyler had a good idea of U.S. government, how they got involved because they have a history with meddling in other countries' affairs, including messing some of their own stuff up. However, there's some evidence that we could talk about later once we go into our hypotheses. So looking at our similar thoughts that we came together, I think a lot of us could think of, and from the evidence shown in the article that we were able to go off of, the Taliban and the extremist views of any kind of terroristic capabilities. We have Islamic extremists, the Al-Qaeda. It even specifically states the first attackers, Bilal and Akram, and even in Bhutto's book that was posthumously posted, there was Qadri Saifullah Akhtar that was named as a potential suspect after her death. So we also have United States intelligence as they suspected that the Al-Qaeda and terrorists were also behind it. There's the Taliban. There was a 15-year-old assassin conspirator. There was the people that Bhutto personally named. Hamid, I'm definitely butchering these names. I do apologize. IG Shah, Arbab Ghulam, Chaudhry Perez, and Hamid Gul. Who was named specifically by Bhutto. And so these are some of the similarities that we did come across. And the same thing with the Pakistani government and the way they handled some of the aspects of the case were very suspicious and outside of regular norms, at least to us here in the United States, and how we would look at a case. And some of the suspects that we both agreed on originally were the Taliban U.S. government and the Pakistani government. So from here, I'm going to hand it off to Skyler, and he's going to speak to you about some of the hypotheses that we came up with.
Okay. In conclusion, we came up with 5 hypotheses as to who was possibly behind the assassination. And our first hypothesis was the Pakistan Prime Minister, Pervez Musharraf. And some of our reasons why include, the Pakistani officials, they seized the doctor's documents after they released a report that conflicted with what the government said. Also, after the assassination, the crime scene was completely power washed down. And who has the power to order the streets to be washed? The only person who could have that power was Pervez Musharraf. And on top of that, Scotland Yard was called in to investigate the crime scene. However, Musharraf heavily restricted them and very much limited the scope of their investigation. Our second hypothesis that we came up with was the Taliban or Al-Qaeda extremists. And some of our reasonings why include a 15-year-old who was caught, and he confessed that he was a suicide bomber sent to kill Bhutto, and he also named several other people who were possible assassins. Another piece of evidence we came up with was in traditional Pakistan, women are very repressed, and Bhutto challenged cultural norms, and the Taliban didn't like that. And Finally, the U.S. intelligence went out and claimed that the Taliban were responsible for the attack. All right. Now, for our third hypothesis, we suspected that possibly the U.S. government could have orchestrated this attack or been behind it. And our first piece of evidence for that was that the U.S. government was very quick to provide their evidence against others, evidence in quotation marks, because their only evidence they did produce was a single screenshot of a conversation that pointed to the Taliban, which, well, that's not very strong evidence for the Taliban. And the U.S. government does have a history of meddling in other countries' affairs, such as starting civil wars in Latin America, sponsoring military coups in South America. Argentina comes to mind. And also arming extremist groups to fight against the Soviet Union in the 60s. And since they did that in the past, what's to stop them from assassinating a political outsider in Pakistan? Now, our fourth hypothesis that we came up with was possibly a family member, specifically Fatima. And our reasoning for that was because Bhutto's brother was assassinated a while ago, and Fatima holds Bhutto's actions responsible for the death. So possibly this could be a case of just
revenge.
Yeah, just simple revenge for family tragedies. And our fifth and final hypothesis was the political rival Nawaz Sharif. And our evidence for that is one, he disagreed with many things politically and personally that Bhutto stood for, and power can be a motivator. He possibly let the power go to his head or something like that, got blinded by power, and just wanted to take Bhutto out.
Typical Julius Caesar power struggle.
So. Exactly. So those were our hypotheses, and that was our information.
Yeah, and then looking at it for, there was some of the suspicious activities that was given to us just to conclude a little bit of this. There's doctors that changed their mind to head injuries. They said it was a sunroof versus an actual gunshot wound, and a lot of that was also restricted from the cover-up of Scotland Yard that we talked about earlier, because since they were restricted, they really couldn't get the correct information out that they wanted to. There was also, like Skyler talked about, who watched the streets. I'm sure a city official or a mayor or however their government sects work over there. But really, ideally, when it comes down to something like that, how quickly the streets got washed probably came from somebody really powerful. And with the stuff that we did speak about on our points, there's going to be counter arguments for or against. One of the counters is the Taliban never claimed responsibility, and especially with things happening after 9/11, they were pretty quick. Taliban and Al Qaeda were very quick to claim any kind of terroristic threats that they were responsible for. Other terrorist groups could have been usually flout for attacks because there's always separate sects with power struggles here and there, especially today happening in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran. The current government was having a personal civil war with the Taliban, and they might see Bhutto as a de-escalating conflict, and
she could have brought an end to the fighting possibly. So
exactly,
they would have no reason to want to kill Bhutto.
Mm-hmm. And the counter for the United States, right now we have no clue if they had a personal motive inside of it. So with the evidence that we have provided with this case study, the U.S. had no motive. There's just looking at some of the counter arguments, it's really hard to point to exactly who it is, but I think Skyler and I strongly believe that it was Persev Mashov that was behind the assassination, with evidence pointing that way, with the corrupt political activity that was connected to it.
Yep.
And that's it for our presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for your time.